So this is a shallow pond. I dug it to be about 4 or 5 feet deep, which is just the right depth so that the cattails don't take over the whole thing. And so when that corral, whenever it rains, manure runs into this pond and it causes an explosion of duckweed. And then every day, twice a day, I can go along with this little net here, and I just go along and scoop stuff out, throw it on the dock, drains through. I got a scoop shovel, I throw it into a 5-gallon bucket, and I can get 2 5-gallon buckets twice a day filled with duckweed. As long as it's only for about 2 months when the temperatures are ideal. But they've done studies where they've fed chickens up to 50% of their diet is duckweed, and there's no loss in weight gain or egg production. I also feed it to my pigs. They've done the same thing. Up to 50% of their diet can be duckweed, no loss in weight gain or production. I've trained my pigs and chickens to eat it now. The chickens actually, there's a little rubber mat there that is kind of covered with grass, but I designed it so that the chickens can actually walk into the pond, and that matting stops the grass from growing up. Because how I discovered this whole thing was I threw this duckweed in because I wanted it to just look pretty. It was a nice green plant. I saw some at a local pond. I grabbed some, threw it in. The next day it like took over the whole pond. And that was interesting. And then the chickens started reaching out and eating it. And so then I started harvesting it, throwing it up, and they just went crazy for it. So what is this plant? I did some research. Turns out they use it all over the world as an alternative food source. Like there's villages in India where they actually take, there's a 3,000 person village in India where their raw sewage, human sewage, goes into one of these duckweed systems, and it's like a serpentine man-made water treatment system. So it comes in at one end, and by the time it leaves, 3 or 4 days later, you can drink the water. So raw human sewage, you can drink the water, and all the way along, it's producing, duckweed. They've got mangoes and papayas and avocados growing on the banks, and then they're growing duckweed, and then they have fish that live in a pond next door. So they grow duckweed in a sewage system, throw it over to the fish in the pond next door, and they're producing basically all of the fish and fruit that the entire village needs, plus enough to export just off of their waste from a system like this. So this is I'm getting, call it 200 pounds a day at peak production, and I'm like, the whole pond is covered. It doubles every 24 hours. So you could take 50% of it every 24 hours. If I was taking 50% of this pond, it would be probably 500 pounds a day you could take off of it, and it would still. I actually have problems getting enough nutrient. If it doesn't rain, I have to, scoop bucketfuls of cow shit and throw it into the water to keep things going. That's how much fertility it needs.
What if you don't harvest it? Then you're just going to overgrow.
Yes, if you didn't harvest it, the nutrients would start to build up, and it would be, it probably would get. It's called eutrophication, which is basically when things start to decompose, they suck oxygen out of the air. But as long as you harvest enough, it's great. So here's how I'm going to take this here's how I want to take this system and improve it even more. Is I want to put a greenhouse over top of this pond. And then I'm going to put, there's these systems that they use for, they're called oil skimmers, like because oil floats. And so they're called weir skimmers. So they sit in the water and they basically just suck, the top half inch or whatever water off, and they can pump it up. And so they also make these for duckweed, because all these golf courses have this duckweed problem because they fertilize their greens and it runs off, and it's funny, humans don't like it when things grow where they don't want them to grow. And so it's a massive problem, particularly in the States. So this one company makes these. They're crazy expensive, but I'm just going to build my own someday. So basically what I would do is you'd have this thing in a greenhouse, and it'd be easy to have a greenhouse on that side with just arches over. And because the ideal temperature is 30 degrees Celsius water. It's very warm water. That's when it's at peak production. And so greenhouses are super hot. And the water also would act as a thermal mass, which would store the energy so you could go into the swing season. So like, as of right now, I'd be getting hundreds of pounds of duckweed right now, easily, on a day like today, from the system. And so, by building, spend a few $1,000s to build one of these duckweed systems over it, put an automatic skimmer in it, so that, and you just be all solar power. You take 50% of it a day, pump it up to that livestock system into a trough, have the water flow back down into it, so it would push the duckweed back towards the skimmer, and you could literally create it. And then whenever it rains, the shit from the animals, you literally have a perpetual motion machine. Which it's actually better than a perpetual motion machine, because so you think about this, whether you believe that whether you believe that in the Big Bang or an infinite creator, at some point this planet didn't exist, now it does. So all these, this used to be solid rock, or it didn't exist at all. Now it does, and things keep getting better all the time. So it's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's 1 + 1 = 10, 20, 30, up to an infinite amount. We have no idea what we can create. And so, for example, there's something called what's the name of it? They call it. It's in the biodynamics. Oh shit. I can't remember the name of it. Basically, if you take a chicken, a baby chick, if you take an egg and you measure the amount of calcium in that egg, in the shell, in the yolk, everything, and then you let it hatch, and then you track the amount of calcium that's in the baby chick and in the food that the baby chick's getting, all the way up until it starts laying eggs, and then you let it live for 2 or 3 years and it lays all those eggs. The amount of calcium in the eggs that the chicken produces far exceeds the amount of calcium it was born with and it was fed. So there's a process, and I can't remember the name of it, but there's a theory out there that basically, so for example, the people who believe in the big, scientists talk about the Big Bang. At the start of the universe, the Big Bang created only hydrogen, and then from hydrogen all the other elements were created. And so there's basically, there are some people who believe that that process, and I can't remember the name of it, is still going on today. The idea that you can actually create something from nothing.
Is it biomagnification?
No, it's a different name. Bugger, I can't remember the name of it.
Salt?
Pardon?
Is it salt?
No. It might be. I'm not familiar with those, but it's a really simple. I mean, drive through the mountains. You see spruce trees growing off rocks. And then if you could fast forward 1,000 years, there'll be inches of soil there. One of my favorite, there's a beautiful story by Wendell Berry that's about a 5-gallon steel bucket that he found in a bush one day that had been there for 100 years, and there was 6 inches of topsoil in this. Somebody hung it in a tree 100 years ago, and he found it, and the bottom had just about rotted out, but inside that there was 6 inches of topsoil and trees growing in a bucket. That's the kind of abundance that we have, and so we can there's no reason why we can't create. I just showed you that system with our human waste. We can create more than enough food and fuel to heat and feed ourselves from our own waste. Easily. You can do the same thing with these chickens. They're hanging out in the trees right now because it's warm, but they come down, they harvest the whole system themselves. So this is the goal behind permaculture is how do we take the synergies and all these benefits of self-sustaining ecosystems. Like nobody maintains that forest, nobody planted it, nobody watered it, nobody did anything with it, and yet it's still there. So how can we harvest that force in the universe, partner with it, and augment it, and maybe shift it a little bit so that it, as opposed to poplars, we've got apple trees for certain things. And so that's the goal of what we're trying to do